Hello again, and welcome back to Let's Design Shards, a Minecraft MOBA adventure map. I'm quite pleased with how the ravine turned out from our last session, so now with some work completed on the lower regions of the shard, it's time to set our sights higher and begin designing the eastern mountains. In order to do this right, I wanted a boundary that my mountains could stack up against. Using the same generate command from the first session, I set the command to use bedrock and added a -h to the beginning. This created a bedrock wall that circled the shard. From here, I started on the mountains themselves, placing massive spheres of stone through the area, and even using the backing wall to help with placement. I wanted the mountain range to feel truly epic in scale, dwarfing the lower sections of the map, so I made sure to build and stack high until the peaks reached well above the cloud layers. I switched out the brush for one of smaller size and began filling in gaps, fleshing out the range, and even filling some of the mountain's base for a smoother transition point. I also peaked two of the so far largest segments to give each side a larger mountain peak of its own. Before starting this project, I actually had to enter the World Edit configuration file and increase the maximum brush size, as I needed a much larger brush than World Edit typically allows. Moving on, I wanted to create a much better transition between the valley and the mountain range, so I selected the lower section of the mountains. I started out trying to overlay the area with grass, but when that didn't work, I simply switched to the replace command and changed the mountain's base from stone to grass. This gave me the look I desired beyond the fact the whole place looked like it was made of spheres. I then selected the top layers and this time used the overlay command with success to place snow on the mountain tops. Using the smooth command with abandon, I cleaned up the harsh spherical look and blurred the obvious transition lines. I continued to add stone along the eastern edge and smooth out my placement, giving the look that the mountains ever rise towards their far outer edge. Once pleased with the general look, I worked on getting snow to look just right. I removed and reapplied the overlaid snow multiple times and used the smooth command in conjunction with my placement to get the mountain peaks just the way I wanted. It took a while, but eventually I was sufficiently satisfied with the result to move on to the next stage. Looking at the shard from above, you can still see the bedrock wall surrounding the shard, and that the mountains spill over what would have been a hard edge. I once again pulled up my generate command. This time, however, I inverted the command by using a greater than instead of less than symbol. This inverted command removed everything from selected region that was outside the shard's boundaries. The effect is that of a sheer wall running along the end of the mountains. As you can quite obviously see already, not everything was removed by this command. The remaining segments are those outside the selected region containing the shard, and I needed to remove them manually. Starting at the northern end, I selected an airbrush and began blasting away the excess floating chunks. I discovered that instead of using the brush alone, I could select and replace larger segments quickly with air, then continue using the brush to remove the leftover pieces. I moved on to the southern end of the shard and quickly did the same, using a combination of selection replacement and an airbrush. I now had to contend with a large band of dirt cutting across the back of the mountains, created from my previous replace commands that set the base of the mountains to grass. I formed a large stone brush and set a dirt mask on said brush so I could simply paint the dirt into stone without adding extra unwanted features. With the edges and backing cleared up, I could move on to the center of the mountain range and begin the mountain lake. I wanted a more artificial feel for the lake, so that when we construct the Wizard's Tower, the surrounding waters feel like they were magically sculpted. To do this, I located the equatorial center of the range and created a concentric downward depression, which could later be filled with water. My initial creation was too small for my liking, so I broadened my selection and gave the basin a much more gradual inward slope. I took my time and continued working on the lake until I was satisfied with the overall size and look, then used World Edit to fill the basin with water. I then used an airbrush to clear a path to the mountain edge and filled the new riverbed with water that would flow nicely into the lake. Moving to the other side, I carved out a path from the lake and downwards towards the ravine. I worked my way down the path, creating water as I went, and forming the grand waterfall cascading into the river far below. It took some effort to get the water looking as desired, and I had to work on the waterfall's source to keep everything flowing where it should. I didn't like how the lake looked like a bowl of water, so I drained it and started working on the outer edge of the basin. I created another series of concentric circles, this time moving outwards from the basin's edge. I had to fill in quite a few sections along the outer rim and removed some of the upper waterfall to make sure the area looked right. I then spent a fair amount of time on the southern end of the lake, making sure the area continued to slope properly into the lower terrain. After reopening the basin's end, I again filled the lake with water, and once more had to ensure the water was looking and flowing just as I desired. Once happy with the result, I moved up the river to the mountain peaks and formed a jet of water at the top. This was to give the appearance of water gushing from deep below the shard and flowing down the mountain pass into the ravine far below. With the mountain terrain complete, we can rise over the peaks and survey the landscape. While each base will have fortifications that allow the players to scale these mountains, the minimum cover along the mountain passes between each base and the central lake may pose a challenge for any final approach on the enemy walls. A great deal of fighting is likely to take place in the Grand Wizard's Tower, which will rise high from the lake and dominate the central mountain landscape. This high-rising structure will be an important and prominent feature, as capturing the tower will provide advantageous benefits to the controlling side. We've created some interesting features already, but still have a great deal more to do. So if you've enjoyed this and you want to see more, leave a like, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.